Welcome to episode number 4 of the Wheels and Beyond podcast. I'm your host, Ben Durham, and today we have Luis Patricio as our guest. He's a PhD student and part-time professor focused on urban mobility and environmental sustainability, with a national award for corporate mobility projects along with an MA in urban management. He hasn't owned a car since 2007 and has professional, academic, and lived experience in transport justice. We sat down in downtown London, Ontario on his lunch break, where we used the city's public chairs and table to sit and chat on the sidewalk. And this location is in line with our podcast's goals, because this is where conversations about safer streets, traffic reduction, and how people get around our cities motivates us to keep building this awesome community of like-minded people. Something to listen to in this episode in particular is Luis's passion for transport justice, which includes if people are being treated fairly when it comes to accessibility. Not just if places are accessible or not, but if people have the freedom to live, to work, and to have a happy life, no matter how they choose to transport themselves. With that in mind, let's jump right in. We are already getting compliments for setting up the podcast in the middle of downtown London here at Dundas Place. I'm Ben, and yes, we just started. Who are you?
My name is Luis Patricio, and before I share a little bit about myself, I just want to say thank you for indulging me. As you said, I think setting up in a place, like having this conversation in a place like this, really invite a conversation. We had a few people asking, like, what are you guys doing? Is it like blogging, vlogging, like good, nice setup? Someone need to move their car and we were in their way. But I think this is what cities are about. Like, it's about being together, it's about navigating spaces together, it's about, just finding different things with different people. I think that's one of the biggest motivation of being in the city. And, if you talk to the Peñalosas and the young girls, they will say, like, the most, how do they put it? The favorite toy of a child is another child. And the most attractive things to people is other people. So, yes, setting up in a place like this might be a little bit more challenging, but I think it's at the core of what I am trying to do, and I think of what you are trying to promote as well.
Even one tad bit more before we get to who you are. You mentioned the city office over there. You were doing a bike count right here, right? Like within the, 10 meters of here?
It was actually like right here at this planter. And this is for the pedal pole annual count that they do this like in several cities around the country, and each city chooses which spot they want to do the counts. And obviously, Dundas Street is an important bike path, bikeway. So I was doing the count here early in the morning from 7 to 9 a.m.
Got it. And what were your findings?
So I published this on my blog recently, like a little bit of what I saw, like more quantitative and more qualitative insights. But one of the interesting things that I didn't know is, like, as I was counting here, closer to 9, like 8:15 to 9, I saw at least, I want to say 10 people arriving by bike to work at the City of London office. So I would say there are quite a few employees from the City of London who actually bike to work, which I think is really important too. If they're working with planning and designing city and roadways and things like that, they actually get that experience. Like, they know what it feels like to be a cyclist in London.
Yeah, I really, really think that that's important when you are doing the planning to actually have some lived experience there, where you ride into the office and you're like, wow, that part right there could probably use some improving. So then when a meeting comes up, that person's going to say, hey, just out of my, they're not going to say lived experience, but out of my lived experience, can we fix this street corner because it seems dangerous because X, Y, Z, and ABC? Mm-hmm. And then it happens.
And they have the technical knowledge, right? Because sometimes cyclists will come like, guys, there is something wrong with, and they don't know how to put that into words that would translate into actual changes in the urban design. But having someone with the technical expertise, experience, with also the live experience is really a good combo.
Yep. So that leads to you, kind of. That was not a great segue, but I'm going to bring it right back. You're Luis.
Yes.
But what else? What else about you makes you you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think how to position myself when I'm introducing, and I do like to say I think it's important for this context, right? Like I am from Brazil. I was born and raised in Brazil, and I lived for 15 years before moving to London. I lived in Curitiba. So for urban planning, and some people know who are in the urban planning world, Curitiba is known as the birthplace of the bus rapid transit system. That's the first city that implemented a system like that, and that's back in the 70s. And when they did that, was totally tied with land use. So it would have the high rises along the BRT corridors. So this is part of me, and also it's in Curitiba that I really started my, how can I say, commuter life, bike commuter life, and bike advocate life. My hometown is also in Brazil, but 4,000 kilometers away from Curitiba, and I used to drive pretty much for everything. When I moved to Curitiba was that spark that actually got me into cycling because I didn't know the city. I still didn't have a job. So just biking around helped me save a lot of money and also get to know the city in a slower pace, like from my neighborhood to other parts of the city that I wasn't familiar at all. And I think from there, and this is, 2004, there was like a kind of critical mass movement that wasn't really happening. So we restarted that. And like the first few months was me, my wife, my brother and his wife, and a couple of other friends from work. So like under 10 people. A couple of years after that, we already had almost 100 people. And then in a few years, we were doing critical masses like at least once a year. We're doing critical masses with over 2,000 people. And I'd say this is one of those experiences that everybody, those lists, things that you need to do before you die. Riding your bike in a big urban center. Curitiba has 3 million people, like the metropolitan area. In a big urban center with hundreds and thousands of other people is one of those things.
See, I know it's starting. It's not thousands, but it's starting in London. For the last 2 years, there's been the slow roll. And the first year, I was traveling with Natalia and we were out of country. And that was when it happened. And then I was like, okay, we're definitely going to we're going to go next year. And then I had a wedding and was part of a wedding party on June 1st of 2024 and couldn't go to that one. So I had a bunch of people film for me. But yeah, I really wanted to experience that. And I will next year. I say that now, and I really hope nothing else comes up. But I'm not going to just say but I will. What was the attendance? It was like attendance. It was like
400.
400 this time, or was it more like the 200 range? Because I wasn't sure if it was like 150, 200, 250. Either way, it's not thousands. But,
no, yeah, a few hundred.
It's still so cool to see here in London. And so it's only going to grow from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think what sparked that in me, and it's interesting because I'm a commuter. Like I usually, although COVID changed things a bit, I usually don't do trips on my bike. But I did this one trip back in 2004, and that's what made me realize that if I can use a bike to go so far, not everybody can. It is true, but there's so many people who are willing to do that if there is safe infrastructure, if it's convenient. And that's when I really said, no, we need to get the critical mass back together. And the critical mass is more than just about the ride. Just like setting up here, I think the critical mass is that invitation for a dialogue with different people in a shared public space. So to me, one of the main values of the critical mass was to bring people together that wanted to do something about creating better cities. From that, I started a bike to work program at in my company. We had 1,200 employees, but 2 or 3 used to bike to work regularly. By the time I left, and that was 10 years, was a 10-year program, there were 125, 130 people biking to work regularly. And when I say regularly, I mean like at least twice a week. So it made a huge difference. Then I joined a urban mobility master program to research urban mobility, particularly cycling in Brazil and in Curitiba. And then I got involved with other more political behind the scenes initiatives. I work with the traffic department, and we make mandatory to have questions about cycling for anyone who's taking the driver's license. And what that meant is that like every day, thousands of people had to answer questions about what is the safe distance when you're, overtaking a cyclist, like who has the right of way in this or that intersection. And I think they might not seem super sexy, right?
Also not super sexy was that noise. Revving next to pedestrians in downtown. We've been like to New York and other places. We'll bring it right back. But just don't. No one cares. Please stop. Like, stop revving in downtown cores. Sucks for everyone. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know if just like a polite request will work, because there's actually research. It's obvious, but there's actually research showing that people who have those loud mufflers actually have mental health problems. They have ego and self-image problems. So it really takes therapy for them to stop revving. It's a bigger issue. Anyway,
real talk here.
It wasn't super sexy work, because it's not a super nice photo op, someone just in front of a computer coding things, right? Because it's an online test. But if you think about it, it's really a systemic transformation to think that for all the drivers in the state that probably didn't bike or didn't know about the rules of the road, they actually had to study for the test and actually had to answer 2 or 3 questions in order to get their driver's license. So that's the kind of thing, from 20 years now, pretty much, from 2004, and we're 2024, I've been involved in more grassroots, direct action, critical mass kind of thing, to academic or more like business-oriented initiatives, and also political systemic change in terms of urban mobility. So this is a little bit of who I am. And I guess I'm still on that journey because I'm just starting a PhD on the topic of transport justice.
There we go. So I was going to do a great segue. I will, but it's like a 5-minute delay. You mentioned earlier that when you were younger, you didn't have the means for a car, etc. And the perfect tool for the job of getting around and going to school and doing all of that was a bicycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was your first introduction to biking, pretty much, aside from when you were a kid. But actually getting around and doing things was with schooling, or no?
I got my driver's license a week after I had a legal age, and I bought my dad's car. Mm-hmm. So I was driving it as soon as I could. Before I had my driver's license, I would get around mostly by bus. I would rarely bike. There was 1 or 2 times that I went to school by bike, and that was like a 10-kilometer trip on arterial road. And where I come from is really hot. So it was kind of an adventure for me, but it wasn't anything that was doable on a regular basis. But I started taking the bus when I was 11, 12, pretty much 3-4 times a week. So other than getting a ride with my parents in their car, my main way of getting around in my hometown was by bus.
Got it. And I guess my segue did not work. But the reason I was getting into that was the equity side of things, where, hey, cars cost a lot. They are very expensive to purchase, own, maintain, fuel, all of those things. And then they also cost society a lot, but that's a whole other thing. Want to talk about your PhD stuff?
Yeah, it's interesting, and obviously coming from Brazil, the contrast is even more stark, right? You would have 10%, maybe even less, of trips being made by cars, and still they would take 70-80% of the space on the roads. So I think for me, coming from that place, I can really understand how unjust, how unfair it is to prioritize motorized transportation, personal vehicles, personal cars. And I always struggle because moving to Canada, this is less obvious. Cars are everywhere, and we talked before about the car brain and modal normativity.
Modal normativity.
Yeah.
Where's that from?
There is a research, and I can find that link. But it's and they have surveys. They will ask folks about what they think is just and fair, and then they will make a similar question, but they will replace with cars. And the change in the response is dramatic. For example, they would ask questions about, do you think is fair that people use public spaces to store private items? Right? When you frame the question in this way, in a more generic way, like the overwhelming response is no, like it's public. Like we can't just let people use them as if it's at home.
Yeah, so an example would be, is it okay to use put a wardrobe in a parking space or on the street? Like
Yes.
your personal wardrobe with clothes in it.
Yeah, and I don't remember exactly how because it was actually they did a survey, like they administered a survey. So I don't remember exactly how the framing was. But yes, you're right. And then they would, right after that, they would ask pretty much the same question, like, are you in favor, like, what do you think about public parking? Like parking on public streets. And then the answer will be very different. Like a lot of people would be neutral. Like, yeah, sure. And others will be even very supportive. Like, yeah, of course. Like we need, free parking. When they just said that to use public space for private objects, it's not okay, right? So that's one example of the car brain.
So the solution is, if you want to store your personal property on the street, just put 4 wheels on it. Done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting out of this.
and a loud muffler, even better.
Yeah.
Something like
Cue the loud muffler.
Yeah, make it really loud and noisy. It is because of the car brain. I think the discussion around transport justice is different and not super obvious in North America, but still, it is a significant portion of the population. There's a book published this year, When Driving is Not an Option is American, and they're estimating 30% of the population who don't have access to a vehicle, a personal motorized vehicle. And it looks like the number for Canada, again, they don't research, they don't have those numbers super easy, right? Because this is not what they're interested about. It's slightly low, but we're still talking about 25% of the population who don't have a driver's license. We're talking about kids, we're talking about newcomers, we're talking about
those with disabilities or who are over the age where they seriously should not be driving, because a lot of the collisions recently here in London, which are into buildings, not even into children. However, I say children because unfortunately over on Riverside, I think it was 2 years ago, an older lady, whoopsies, just mixed up the pedals, which shouldn't be happening when you're operating a very dangerous vehicle. And unfortunately, she plowed into a bunch of children and killed one. And that little girl is now dead because of car dependency. And there's that woman still has her license, shouldn't, but does.
And that's why the transport justice conversation is very important, right? Because it is a systemic issue. It's not an individual issue. If we stop at that lady shouldn't have a driver's license, we're missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
If we take away that person's driver's license, and again, like a huge body of work in studying that, it's one of the most significant predictors of depression, severe depression, and significant decline on quality of life for senior citizens.
I'm assuming because of isolation, yes?
Because of isolation, because of the car dependency, right? So it's not simply a matter like you can't drive, we're taking your driver's license and off you go. Because then we're creating another social problem of a whole segment of our population who will be excluded from living their lives, right? So mobility, transport justice is really, as for example, Vision Zero, right? It goes beyond the road user, and it is a lot about how we, a lot of the theory comes from distributive justice. So how we distribute resources, goods, or social goods, as Michael Walzer likes to frame it, that every good is a social good, every good has a social meaning, how we distribute and how we produce those goods. So it's really questions about how much resources, meaning space, time, professionals, money, materials, are we allocating for this or that mode of transportation, and like how much we invest in moving people, whether they're using cars, whether they're using public transit, whether they're biking, like how we are allocating those resources. And it's a spatial discussion too, like where, not only how we share between the modes, but where the big investments are made. And there's no way to talk about mobility without talking about land use and zoning, right? Like, which brings another huge issue in Canada and around the world, which is housing. And the concept of compact cities or the 15-minute city. All this is part of transport justice conversation. If people could find healthcare, education, social opportunities, cultural activities within 10 to 15 minute range by walking or cycling from their home, then of course it's a no-brainer. Whenever it gets a little harder for someone to drive, they should just not drive, right? Whether because they're a senior or because they have a physical or mental disability or because they can't afford to have a car, they would have other options. Because in North America they don't, then we are in this paradox. Like, do we allow people who shouldn't drive to drive, or do we remove that privilege, because it is a privilege to drive a car?
Which a lot of people get mistaken for a right. And after a few months of driving, they're like, yeah, I deserve this. And really, it's a privilege. They say that in the handbooks and everything. Driving is a privilege, not a right. And actually, just to do with what you were just saying, you waved at Natalia as she went by because she came down with me today to get a haircut or a hair appointment thingy. And she just is going home across the city now on her bike. And just from the community aspect, I know I'm kind of going off here. It's just really cool to just be able to see people. I know you have your blue cargo bike, and whenever I see that, there's one time I stopped and I waited for you to come out of the shop over in Old East Village, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, hey. And right before that, because I didn't know you were going to be coming out, I messaged your partner, and it was just so funny. I'm like, hey, I'm just stalking Luis, apparently, because I just saw your bike locked up outside. It's just such a nice identifier. So anyways, it builds community and all of that. I might need to take a quick break because I am going to get a sunburn because the sun has changed directions. So we're going to do a quick cut here. Okay, we have successfully relocated to the other side of the sidewalk. So one of the things that a lot of people may not even understand when they block a sidewalk is about accessibility or lack thereof. So what we are trying to do with this very wide sidewalk is not infringe on people's walking ability and even the biking ability. And we actually have, like, how many cyclists behind us right now on the road? Four. And before that, when we were doing this, like, there's like an e-bike of some sorts. It's just like cars take, I think, like, the takeaway for all of this is that cars take up a lot of space, and we design, like you said, 80% or more of our public spaces to accommodate cars. Yeah?
We'll design 100% of the city to accommodate cars, but they take the big chunk of our public spaces, yes. But the whole city, I'd argue the whole world now is like pretty much tailored to, accommodate the car.
You can be in the middle of nowhere, camping, and if you can't drive to somewhere, people are disappointed, which I find somewhat ironic because especially camping, when all of the advertisements for like the big trucks and Jeeps, etc., are to enjoy nature. But actually, really what it seems like they're trying to convey is destroy nature. Like just get a big, heavy box with big wheels, chunky wheels, so that you can dominate nature.
Just think about, like, we have car models that are called eco sport. Like, a car is not ecologic and it's not a sport. Like, you can get more, it's an oxymoron. You can get worse than that.
Eco sport. I will never see like one of those eco sport SUVs the same way again.
Doesn't
That's
make
funny.
any sense.
I think a lot of these things that we'll end up discussing on this podcast, and we're going to like end up talking again in the future, obviously, because that's what we do. But once you see it, it's really hard to unsee.
Can I mention one thing?
You can definitely mention one thing.
Because you're talking about accessibility, and this is how the term is used in more generally, which is totally fine. When you're talking about access to locations, and it's usually related to ability. In transport justice literature, accessibility is the core measure of justice. One of the main voices in transport justice literature is a fellow named Karel Martens. He's Dutch, I believe. He's now working at the University of Israel, and he wrote a book called Transport Justice in 2017. And he really draws from a lot of theoretical social justice theories. John Rawls, Michael Walzer that I mentioned earlier, Ronald Dworkin, Amartya Sen, and a few others. And for Martens, the basic measure, the main measure of transport justice is accessibility level. So I want to unpack a little bit of this, because since we're going to have more conversations, I'll be talking more about accessibility. And accessibility is the capacity to reach destinations. And this applies to anyone, whether you are able-bodied, whether you are a man, woman, old, young, have money, no money, biking, busing, walking. Accessibility is basically your capacity to find work, to find entertainment, to take care of your health, to, find social connections and everything else. So accessibility is much more encompassing when you're talking about transport justice than how we usually use the term.
You make a lot of good points there. Because, if you hear accessibility, and how I was using it here on the sidewalk, and
which
implying,
is fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I want to make sure, like, my thought here was, can a wheelchair get by? And it got to the point where, like, okay, no, we have to be up against the wall so that they have the whole other side of the sidewalk. So we're taking up like 20% of the sidewalk. And so, I was just thinking from an accessibility standpoint, but I used that word thinking of, I guess, the wheelchair use, etc. And you're saying, actually, it's everything.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's a matter of definition, right? Like, it's not that it's wrong to say that. I just want to make the clear distinction, because when I'll be talking about accessibility in our conversations, I'll be talking about all those things combined. When you're talking about wheelchair accessibility or things like that, it's one of the dimensions that is ability, right? If you are able-bodied or not. And the other thing with accessibility when it comes to transport justice is that accessibility is, how can I say, a two-way street, no pun intended, in the sense that it's accessibility of places and accessibility of the person. So accessibility of places, we're looking at the place and see if people can get to that place. And accessibility of the person, we're looking at different people and trying to understand if they can get to the different places that they want to. It seems like it's the same thing. Obviously, they're complementary. We want people to get to places. But when we're actually taking action, when we're actually measuring if we're being successful or not, again, for our purposes here and in the transport justice literature, we are talking about accessibility of people. We're not measuring if places are accessible. We're talking if people have the capacity to reach the places that they need to. This is the perspective that we'll be adopting. If people have the capacity to reach the destinations that they need or want to.
And so I am getting confused with the two. So you're saying there's two different accessibility ways to think about things. There's the getting to the destination and
how much a place is accessible. This is the accessibility of the place.
Okay.
And how capable someone is to reach that destinations. That's the accessibility of the person. So in transport justice, we're not looking at places and try to figure out if they're accessible. We start with people, like the questions. And this is not just like this is just not an exercise in terms and the lexical exercise. It is important because the questions are like, what are the places that you need to get to? We're looking from the person perspective, like how difficult it is to get there. Like, why do you need to get there? How important is that for you? Again, every good is a social good, and accessibility is a social good. So, going to your parents' house has a different value for each person and for each culture, right? So the questions come from that perspective, the accessibility of the person. If they can get to places, how hard it is, and how much do they want or need to get to those places. So it changes the conversation completely. If you're looking at the accessibility of places, and then we're asking questions like, is there a road leading to that place? Like, is it flat? Is it, wide enough for people? And this is not the important question.
Okay.
From a transport justice perspective, we're looking at how people are being treated fairly, or if they're given the freedoms that we have in Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, like the freedom to go as they please, whatever they want, the freedom to choose work, the freedom to live, and the freedom to have a healthy life. Because this is where we're coming from. We're primarily talking about accessibility of people and not accessibility of places.
So I know that you mentioned, I'm just trying to kind of get a case study for this. So you mentioned Fanshawe Conservation Area and how it is not accessible by bus right now. They did actually install some bike lanes, which are very, very nice. And you can get there now fairly easily on a bike. You do have to cross Veterans Memorial at a stoplight, but at least that's fairly nice. But is this kind of what you're getting at? Like the accessibility of a place you as a transit user are not able to get there? I'm just trying to figure out a case study. Can you walk me through a story or an instance of this?
If you like, I'll try to use your example, right? Like Fanshawe Conservation Area. So if we are concerned with accessibility, and our case study is Fanshawe Conservation Area, the initial question is not, do we have a road, do we have a bus route, or do we have a bike lane? That's not the initial question. That will be part of the conversation. But the initial question is like, who needs to get there and for what?
Okay, so what would those examples be? So staff, first of all?
Yeah, so if you are working there, when do you need to get there? When do you need to leave? How many times a week do you go? Monday to Friday? Like, they have weekend programming? Is that a different time? Like, when do you get there? What is your limitations to get there? if you are a user, if you're just visiting the park, who are you coming with? Are you coming by yourself? I'm talking about kids, school groups, families, who is coming, how they need to, what mode of transportation they need to use to get there, accessibility as, again, you're using originally, right? Like their ability to get there. Did they require any particular needs in terms of like wheelchair accessibility? And again, this is just this should be just the norm, right? Whenever thinking about those things. And when you have answers to those questions, then you looking at, okay, so how are the roads? How are the bike lanes? What are the transit routes to get there? And what is the frequency of service? And what time of the day and week do they operate? But you don't ask those questions before you understand what is the accessibility needs of the people.
Got it. So human-centered user experience design?
Yes. Yeah. You can put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to like put some constraints on that. Yeah.
We're not, transport justice is not, it doesn't start with the physical environment. We're not building roads for the sake of building roads, or building residential apartments or schools or whatever it is for the sake of building them. They have a purpose. They're serving people. And obviously we didn't get into that, like all the non-human friends in the environment as a whole, as right to live and exist. We're not getting to that discussion. It's a whole other discussion. But we're not building things just for the sake of building them, just because we want, spend our time or they look nice. We want to provide a service to someone, right? So the first question is like, who are those people and what do they need?
Okay, so how did you want to finish this off? Did you want to talk a little bit of about Hamilton Road, or because that's a fairly recent, I was going to say it's a very recent event that happened, but it isn't. It's an ongoing problem. In this case, Hamilton Road here in London, Ontario has a huge problem. The huge bit is the 4 lanes and the weird parking and the lack of actually serving its place as it's a connector right now, and people go through it, but it's not a place to be. And so even the businesses are suffering, and I don't even think they know it. Do they? Do they see this and say, we don't want a safer street because we want people to continue to just pass us by in this 4-lane road?
I actually heard from a few businesses that they are looking at Hamilton Road more as a street. And I'm talking now, we're considering the strong towns language, right? Like a street, which is a place for people to be, more than a road that is just like a
highway. You can think of it as a thoroughfare rather than a place.
Yeah.
And a street is that, and a strode is neither. And it's both dangerous and it's annoying and horrible for everyone to use, actually, including drivers. So it's just the worst of all of the worlds.
Yeah, I want to end with one comment, and it's about a meme that my partner Haley Tallman put recently. And it's obvious for some of us how it's a meme with Bart Simpson, and in one of the scenes he has glasses and is using a cane as if he was blind, and the meme says something about, this is how we are addressing road safety concerns or any restrictions around parking, or any things that we want to do to promote cars. We don't really pay a lot of attention. Just things we just take for granted. And if we need to build more roads or a new underpass or more parking, there's no real evaluation of the impacts of those things. Whereas when we want to build anything that is not for cars, like we were talking about extending a bus route, creating a bike lane, reducing parking spots so more pedestrians can have a wider sidewalk, anything like that, then it goes, and then in the meme has like a huge telescope, right? Like it's very much under scrutiny on how this is going to be implemented and how much this is going to cost and what are the economic impacts, positive or negative, and so many obstacles to even get started with any kind of project like this. And I think the transport justice conversation is to really frame how unfair the whole treatment is. So not just how the state of affairs is, like the roads, the road infrastructure and everything, but even how we are still continuously building and perpetuating that kind of practice that increases the gap between the have and have-nots. And again, core measure for transport justice, have and have-nots of accessibility to the city.
It sounds like a lot of people that I've been talking with are saying similar things, which is not surprising to say the least, but a really simple way of saying what you were saying, I think, is maybe changing defaults. So flipping entirely the, hey, we're going to build this, and the exclusion is safe infrastructure. But if the default is to put safe infrastructure in, and then the exclusion is, hey, this is so safe that maybe it is actually impeding traffic in this one case, and we have to look into it because we may not go forward with this project because it would endanger people. But if that's the default, where it's actually safe infrastructure first, then that seems normal, but that's totally flipped on its head right now. It is build an unsafe piece of infrastructure, and then if people are either getting hurt or dying or are unhappy about it, then we'll look into it. Just maybe. And there's a few cases in London, and obviously so many cases throughout the world, that people are very angry. They get up in arms, and let's say around schools, and I'm going to have someone else on a podcast, and they're going to talk about how they spent 2 years fighting for safer streets around the school, and they were about to pass it and do 1 hour before, and this is like the really high level overview, but 1 hour before and after school for pickup and drop off times, or vice versa. They were going to do that and be like, hey, we're going to put up pylons, change the built environment temporarily, and we're going to change the built environment by putting up pylons. It's not going to stop someone from flooring it through, but they'd have heavy fines, etc. And then 2 very vocal people spoke up and axed the entire project and verbally abused, from my understanding, city staff. So they got their way because they went, wah, wah, wah. I don't want this because X, Y, Z, A, B, C. It's bonkers. And that's why the exclusions should be for less safe infrastructure, not for safe infrastructure. Wow, that was a little tangent. I'm so sorry.
No, I think what you said is very important to the conversation, right? Because if you talk to any transportation engineer, they will tell you that they are building the safest road infrastructure that they know. And they're following, codes and regulations to do that. They're not just choosing things randomly from the top of their head. The problem with that is that, one, and there's a book, Killed by Engineer, published this year as well, Wes Marshall. One is that a lot of those regulations are way less scientific than what we presume they are. So in a way, it's a little bit random, but they've been doing this for so many years that it looks like it's scientific. In the second one, they are looking primarily for the safety of drivers, again, because of the car brain and the car-centric planning. So when you have, roads with less trees, less obstacle, chicane, like a space where even if the driver loses control of the wheel and is going at 70 kilometers an hour, he won't hit a wall immediately. They're doing this in the name of safety, right? But when they do that, they are prioritizing the safety of drivers and not the safety of everyone else that using the road. It goes back to the justice conversation, like how much resources are we putting on one specific way of getting around, and how much privilege people using one or the other have, like who actually need to have the supports to have minimal accessibility levels. Of all that, a lot of the discussion of accessibility is the understanding that we should have a threshold, like a minimum level accessibility that is unacceptable to have less than that. We use that for a lot of the primary basic social goods, right? Like for education, we have free elementary and middle school for kids. Healthcare, we have, a lot of, could be better, but we do have a lot of things that we can get for free. We have a minimum wage, so nobody's supposed, again, it could be much better. Minimum wage is not a living wage, and it's not by any means a thriving wage, but there's a minimum wage that determines that no one can get paid less than that. We don't have anything like that for transportation. We don't even know exactly what a minimum accessibility level would be. But that's one of the core questions in transport justice. Like, what is the minimum accessibility level that anyone should have in order to lead life, just to live, just to get by?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of question that needs to shift in terms of transportation planning. And even when you're thinking about safety, safety for whom and to what detriment in terms of how much mobility and accessibility we're taking away from people by providing safety to just a few of the road users.
Who, just a reminder, already have a very safe vehicle where if they can't run into light posts, which maybe we could end on that because I know you have a very interesting bit about bolts and light posts and safety about that, but give me 1 second here. We're making roads, quote, safer for drivers of these, how Jameson put it, living rooms on wheels. But they're fairly safe, minus rollover stuff and high-speed collisions because you're going at a high speed. But it's dangerous for everyone else outside of moving these very deadly vehicles. And so it's just a weird concept. But to go off of that, the light posts, the shear, something about the shearing.
Yeah. Well, and again, it just becomes industry standard, right? I don't even know if traffic engineers didn't want to buy posts like this if they could, because probably this is just the standard for anywhere. But they are designed in a way that if a car hits them, they wouldn't keep standing. They would just fall over, right? And that's, again, this is a safety measure to prevent collisions that will be more severe and critical to people inside the car. The interesting thing is like a lot of those light posts are right at the intersection where pedestrians should be waiting to cross the road. So at the same time that they're supposed to flop when a car hits to prevent passengers and drivers to get injured, they are flopping onto pedestrians. So again, who are we catering? And we're talking about the most extreme cases, right? Of how we're prioritizing and how we're distributing resources. But if you think about every little detail in road design caters to people using cars. The timing of lights. If you're driving a car, chances are that you have to wait less for a green light than if you're walking or biking. When you have signs, for example, like no exit streets, a lot of those exits is no exit for drivers. If you're walking or if you're biking, there is an exit, there is a sidewalk that you can go through. So the whole city, like I was saying, is not 80%, right? It's like 100%. Everything is designed to accommodate drivers.
Yeah, actually, perfect example is the cut-throughs that you're talking about in neighborhoods. Yeah, it says no exit. And yet there are so many roads that if you go there on a bike, that is your main route. And it's even more traffic calm because there's no exit for cars. So they're not taking it. So it's just weird though. It doesn't say on that sign, hey, no exit for vehicles or for cars, automobiles, etc. It just says no exit. So people, first thought, everything is designed around the vehicle. So it's pretty bonkers. And added context here, we're talking about those light standards that hold traffic lights and stuff. The bolts at the bottom, the 4 of them typically, are now designed to shear off if a vehicle collides with them, which then, would have the lamppost, the whole street sign fall down instead of staying up. And it would potentially, we'll see it in the news at some point, it would potentially fall onto very vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians, cyclists, or anyone else out there outside of a car. So that was a context. But I think nature is telling us that we're at the end of the podcast because even though we shifted over near to the wall and now the sun has shifted and said, nah, Ben, you're going to be in the sun and burn in the next 5 minutes if we don't end this. So I think that was pretty good. Thank you very much for chatting with me, Luis. I think we'll just have to, I've taken you from your work. Time to go. Thank you very much. Bye.